everything lined up for them to trade Harrison Barnes in the offseason. But the more you look at what they're trying to build and what they're trying to put together for the 22-23 season, Nick, it makes sense that Harrison Barnes is still a King, is still a member of this team. This is at whatever level and for whatever it's worth, this is a win now plan. This is not let's build for the future. Let's get some draft picks for Harrison Barnes so we can be a good team and a contender 2 or 3 years down. Maybe you think it's a short-sighted plan to bring back Harrison Barnes and some of the other pieces of the puzzle with Domas's contract and some of the other things you look at. Maybe it's a short-sighted plan, but when you look at what the goal is for 22-23, Harrison Barnes, he cracked the top 50. Am I right? In ESPN's top 100 players rankings?
I think he did.
I think he was in the top 50. This is a team that's trying to win now. Harrison Barnes is a guy who knows this league, who's had more success in this league than anybody else on that roster. Not a bad guy to have out there on the court and in that locker room if that's your goal. You can call the plan short-sighted, like I said, but if that's your goal, makes sense that Harrison Barnes is here. We shouldn't be surprised.
I'm surprised because I value HB as much as I do, and I thought with 1 year left on his contract, I thought he would be moved as part of a deal. But in hindsight, from the team perspective, as you're saying, Ramie, I'm not too surprised, right? I'm not too surprised because, number one, the mandate. When you come out and you say we got to make the playoffs, and a lot of people believe if this team does not make the playoffs this year, that Monte McNair is gone, and not only is McNair gone, but other changes likely happen. When you levy a mandate like that, you're not just going to give somebody away. I thought he would be gone because I thought somebody would want to trade for him and the Kings could get something that was worth value back. And then you start to look at it in hindsight with the offseason and realize not a lot of cats who make $20 million plus were moved. And the guys that were moved were, kind of like bigger names or guys that you wouldn't really want, right? Like you kind of fall into two categories. You got like the Donovan Mitchells of the world, or you have other guys that are on big contracts that the Kings are not going to trade for. Like you're not going to make one of these trades if you're the Kings. You're not going to trade Barnes for a big contract and a couple of other pieces to get like a draft pick or two. It doesn't make any sense because, as you just mentioned, Ramie, the goal is not to try to build your assets in Sacramento. Your goal right now is to deal the assets that you have to bring back something better, to make you better, to follow that mandate that's been laid down in front of you. So what the team's goals are and who was available, when you really look at it, I don't think a lot of deals made sense for the Kings to deal Harrison Barnes.
And I often wonder, whenever a move is or is not made, Nick, I look at the decision maker or decision makers, and I wonder, especially when you're in a situation like the Kings are in, not a championship contender, right? And I wonder if the decision makers are making decisions for what's best for the franchise and the organization and the long-term success and health of that franchise. And how much is that decision about self-preservation? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You talked about the mandate, whatever it is. We don't know what it is, but you and I both, especially after Vivek's comments last week on Monte McNair's contract and not committing to anything as far as even discussing a contract extension with him right now, that says to us that there's some kind of bar that's been set for Monte McNair and his team to keep that job, that they're going to have to clear to keep the job as the Kings general manager. So was this move made or not made, I should say, out of self-preservation? Because Monte knows I have to put a product on the floor that can win at least a certain level this year. You know what I mean?
Monte doesn't strike me as that kind of a guy. I mean, when you look at some of the decisions that he has made, he probably could have traded Barnes last deadline for like a couple of picks and stuff like that. Maybe he didn't do it. When you look at his approach this offseason, he did not really take huge risks. He signed Malik Monk to a contract that I think is a reasonable contract for Malik Monk. The trade that he made for Kevin Huerter, I think that also plays a role in the whole Harrison Barnes conversation because I thought the Huerter deal was a great deal. The Kings did not have to give up a ton for Kevin Huerter. And because of that, I think it opened up the door for Barnes to stay here Because if you weren't able to make that move with Herter, maybe you would have had a little bit more urgency to try to deal Barnes to get back something. But I think you got Herter at such a low acquisition price that you felt really good about that. And then you started to look at the team and say, all right, simple. If we trade Barnes, we need somebody to be coming back who is as good as Barnes or better.
Now, not
and
future assets, not a project.
And I don't think that existed. And if you were going to try to trade Barnes in a deal for somebody like Donovan Mitchell, the Herter deal also made that tougher because of the picks. Because now once you traded for Herter, you have to, because of all of the rules in the CBA, the Kings did not have carte blanche to throw a bunch of picks at a team like Utah. They didn't have that option. So I think Monty looked at it and said, all right, what deal is on the table right now? Which one makes sense? And it was the Herter deal. So we pulled the trigger knowing it might limit his ability to make another deal down the road or anytime soon. Look, you don't make a deal just to make a deal. Some GMs do. Monty strikes me as the guy who is very calculated and made decisions that he had to make this team competitive, but also not really bail on the future. The Halliburton trade, a lot of people get upset about it because Hallie is young and he's exciting, but you traded for a two-time All-Star who was like 25 years old. It's not like he traded Halliburton for somebody who's in their 30s. And he didn't trade any picks with Halliburton, which I think was crucial. So he's been able, I think Monty's done a great job, Ramie, of really like handling a difficult situation, but finding a way to almost serve two masters.
Getting that delicate balance.
Yes, he's been able to bring in guys that will make this team better right now, but he hasn't really burned down the future, so to speak. Again, the Halliburton trade, you needed to trade one of the three guards. Hallie had the most value. He was the only guy on this roster that was going to get you somebody like Domas, a two-time All-Star.
I guess what I mean is, just to boil it down to one real simple question that I would ask Monty McNair if I got him, in a real honest moment, or that I'll ask you right now, Nick. If there wasn't a mandate, and if you knew you had a 2, 3, 4 year window to get this thing right and to make it the type of NBA team that you envisioned when you became a general manager, would you have traded Harrison Barnes?
I don't think so. So I don't think there was a deal out there that made sense. Because remember, if you're trading Barnes, I mean, look, it's all trying to figure out what was done in the offseason. If you could have, maybe in a scenario, a team would have been interested in Barnes enough to say, hey, we're going to give you like a contract that might have 2 years left on it. You might have to take some bad money the next year or two, but we'll give you some picks for it. But would you make that trade if Barnes was going to a team that was deemed as a contender? Because how valuable are those picks? You're not burning it all the way to the ground. I mean, this was not a complete rebuild.
Sure.
Once you traded Halliburton, like, that was it. Like, once you made that move for Domas, the path was settled. The path was, we're going to try to win basketball games. Because if you were looking at 3-4 years down the road, you would have held on to Halliburton and said, we don't need to make a move right now, and we'll figure out this Davion Mitchell, Fox, Halliburton thing. And if we've got to trade Fox with somebody to get some picks back, again, I think Monty has managed this very well. He's been able to keep the future intact, and he's also improved the team without doing something crazy. The Monk deal's not crazy. The Herter trade was far from crazy. And drafting Keegan Murray. So he's been able to improve the talent of this team without sacrificing the future. And I think that's very difficult to do in the NBA. Now, are they going to be a contender? No, I don't think anybody believes they're going to be a contender. But in the spot that the Kings were in, that's the NBA, man. And that's what's so difficult. If you don't draft somebody like a Giannis, and you're not one of these markets like Miami and LA where people want to go to, you've got to draft, you've got to slowly build, you've got to make the right trades. NBA is very difficult to build a consistent contender if you're not one of those halves, as they say, in the league. The
only way you turn it around in one offseason in the NBA is if a superstar falls in your lap. Otherwise, it's a work of art that takes a long time to finish, long time to fill up that canvas. I've heard some people say, I think JJ alluded to this in our pre-show meeting that maybe Harrison Barnes is still moved before the trade deadline this year.
Yeah, he could be.
I would think, I don't know, we'll see how the season plays out. I would think that if Harrison Barnes is traded at some point in the season, that means things are not going according to plan, and they have ditched the win now mentality.
Are you surprised that Harrison Barnes is still a Sacramento